All right, so if you're actually watching this video right now, it's because I've caught your attention when I said leasing is dead. And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, what does that all mean? And why wouldn't leasing still be the most efficiently and, more importantly, the most financially responsible way to buy a car? As a matter of fact, if you, just like me, have been brought up with all these ads on TV telling you what you can afford per month on a lease special, then this is all very confusing. And I understand that because, listen, as a guy with a banking background, I can tell you that even in banking, we're constantly told that you never ever buy things that are going to depreciate. Instead, you actually lease them. And the reason this matters is because conventionally, when you think of car leases, you think of three key things. You think of lower payments, you think of no hassle selling, and I think this is the better part if you're a business owner, you think of write-offs, right? And so it makes basically leasing a pretty foolproof way to own a car if you actually think about these three things. Conventionally, every single human likes to have a lower payment. They definitely like the idea that they don't have to sell a car because it's terrible to sell a car. And as a matter of fact, they might even get a write-off, meaning there's some kind of benefit if you own a business or somehow are self-employed and you're getting even more back in your pocket, right? So conventionally, if we think of these three things, why would leasing not make sense? Historically, it always did, right? Well, something critical has been happening in the information age over the last 10 years. And you see, slowly, it's that more and more people are waking up to the idea that during this amazing guise that basically everything makes sense and everything is worth less, there is one fundamental problem, is we're never really talking about what car you're getting and what are you actually getting out of it. So let me walk you through a very simple process of even understanding what banks and auto industry doesn't want you to know. Because if a lease is positioned this way, it's quite exciting. But if it's positioned for its true nature, it doesn't sound that good. So let me walk you through how a car basically depreciates so you understand that. This is a graph that basically tells you a car will start here and over time depreciate, right? That is a normal graph, and that makes sense. The majority of cars, however, always have what we call a residual value. That is where your lease basically sets that in 3 years, for example, or 36,000 miles, these are normal conventional leases, a car has a residual value here, for example, of maybe 48% or whatever that value is, right? Now, what they don't really specify to you is not what that rate is, because some cars depreciate less than others and some depreciate much more, right? That's okay. What they don't actually disclose to you is that the majority of a car's depreciating cycle, that same 52% here, occurs in its first 3 years, meaning that during that time, the majority of the depreciation takes place. However, the distance between that 48 to 0 right here to the absolute worthless part of the car is an additional 10 to 15 years. Now, this makes a really significant difference because in the stake of understanding that, that means that at the point you return the car to a dealership, the dealership has the car at the best and least depreciation cycle of the car itself. And let me tell you why. And this may also help you understand why a lease is actually very favored around 3 years or 36,000 miles. Because most car warranties expire in 4 years or 50,000 miles. That is the average car warranty out there. And so the dealer is getting the car back 1 year before the warranty expires and 14,000 miles before the warranty expires. So what the dealer is buying themselves time. They're basically buying themselves this window of opportunity to sell the car and actually make a profit on your car at that time. Now, what is wrong with that? Absolutely nothing. The dealer, which is so nice to transact on the car for you, should absolutely make money for you. The other part, though, that we're not really understanding about leasing is this number, the 52%, because this matters significantly. You see, in the first 3 years of the car, you're buying the worst and heaviest depreciation cycle of a car. So if a lease tells you that it's $5,000 down and let's say $299 or even $599 a month, In retrospect, they would say, well, you're paying that money, and usually in a normal deal, this money would be going towards equity, but you will never build equity because of how much depreciation occurs in these 3 months. Therefore, always, at any given time during the lease, being upside down on your lease itself. So, again, why is that bad if you're returning a car? Well, it's really not bad. It's just a question of how much money do you like to throw away. Because if a car is worth $100,000, to give you context, and that $100,000 has a 48% residual rate, it means that $52,000 of that car over 3 years has basically disappeared and is no longer coming back. Now, if you drove this car significantly less miles, it may be worth slightly more than that number, but the dealer won't give you more than that number. They'll usually just buy out your lease at the number, or your lease agreement will tell you that you have to continue making your payments even if you don't want the car, like, at some point earlier. The point of it is that the auto industry guarantees itself that the entire cost of the marketing and profit of their car is paid by you by giving you something called a lower payment. And the way they do that, and the reason why this matters quite a bit, is they're doing something very creative in financing. They're saying that this $100,000 car, which generically with regular finance you probably couldn't afford, is going to become more affordable to you because we're going to take this $52,000 number and we're going to divide that by 36 and we're going to minus your down payment. So we're going to take that number, maybe you have 5K down, so we're going to take 47,000, divide that by 36 and give you a car payment. So on the surface, what they're really doing is giving you the idea that you're affording a $100,000 car for the payment of a $52,000 car. And they're doing that by giving you a lower payment because they're only making you finance the depreciation cycle of a car. And that, in regards, is basically saying, we know this car is never going to be worth more than $48,000. And this $48,000 is the worth of that car at its break-even point. And so what they do basically is say, who will take this car and give us the additional depreciating cycle for the next 3 years while it's on the road? Well, a consumer who typically can't afford a $100,000 car and as a result now has a $52,000 divided into payments loan instead of a $100,000 loan. That is generally why your lease payment is around 50 cents of your finance payment. So if that same car would have been financed, it would have been, let's say, $1,000 a month and $10,000 down, versus if it's leased, it's $5,000 a month and it's $5,000 down and $500 a month. The argument is that the lease simply breaks down the worst depreciation cycle that you're buying and allows you to do that. Now, why is that technically bad? Because if you bought the car at this value and financed it, you would have a higher payment and ultimately find yourself in the same position. Its worth wouldn't actually change. And this is how leasing justifies itself versus financing. It brings up this idea that regardless of what car you drive, it is going to depreciate. No matter what car you drive, it is going to be worth 50% less in a couple of years. Therefore, you should never buy that depreciation. You should lease it because you're having a lower payment and less financial strain. And that technically makes sense if you're driving a Kia, a Volkswagen, or even a Lexus. These things can make a lot of sense and be great value if that is your ultimate dream and how far you've come. However, here is the biggest problem in this equation. And the equation is quite simple. As you evolve up the ladder of cars, not all cars depreciate at this rate. And one of the key things that occurs with certain luxury and exotic cars is the depreciation cycle changes significantly. And I'm going to show you this. You see, this was the depreciation cycle we saw for something like a Volkswagen or let's say a Nissan or even a Lexus. However, with a luxury or exotic specialty car, such as a BMW M5, a Mercedes AMG, a Lamborghini, or Ferrari, these depreciation cycles are quite different. You see, they do start at the top as well, and they come down. However, right here at the 3-year mark, they do something remarkable. They kind of stay steady and trend to go up. So here is where this gets a little bit iffy. You see, at the point of that residual value, right, where a person would say, well, the car's going to keep depreciating, why would I want to keep it? You typically return a normal car. However, with an exotic car, something pretty incredible happens. The leases are shorter, and you're encouraged to give the car back here. And what the dealer is basically buying is this dip right here. You see where the car gets undervalued and then goes up, and puts themselves in an incredible position to actually make money on the car you're returning. So here's the argument. Why would you want to buy a car here to here and lose the largest amount of depreciation, no matter that you lease or buy, when you could buy a car here all the way here, knowing that this cycle means that it's a 2-year-old car? So the argument is, would you own a 2-year-old car knowing that you would never lose money because you would buy it at this point and it would be worth the exact same 2 years later after you're done driving it? That sounds like magic. I mean, it's amazing. A 2-year-old car, most warranties, I just told you, are 4 years or 50,000 miles. And 2 years later, your car is still under warranty. So it's not a question of repairs, right? At all, whatsoever. So the argument is, why wouldn't you do that? Like, that doesn't really make sense. Well, here's how the majority of the media, and more importantly, here's how the majority of online publications have kind of made you believe that there's something wrong about buying a 2-year-old car. And then we'll get back to leasing in a second. The first thing they've done, it says they talked about major problems with used cars. They talked about major problems like engine failures and everything can be expensive, and they ultimately scare you with quite a bit on that. So that itself is a big problem. But why would a 2-year-old car under factory warranty for another 2 years while you own it have major problems? Well, would it matter, or would it be any different than the car that's brand new versus the car that's 2 years old if it's covered under the same warranty? Well, no, it wouldn't matter, and it would be the exact same thing, right? So that wouldn't apply here to any of such issues whatsoever. But wait a minute, if I'm buying the car here and then financing it, am I not getting a larger payment? Because you said that if I leased it here, I got the smallest payment possible. Well, let's do the math, for example, and give you an example of this. If you bought a BMW M5, for example, for $120K new, and its residual value, let's just use this for an example, would be roughly $60,000, like 50% of its value in a couple of years, I want you to understand this. That same car would basically be $60K of financing, right? Or in this case, leasing would only allow you to basically pay the payment on that amount, right? We said that's why you could afford a $120K car, because it would only really finance out at 60K terms. But here's the argument. You see, in this case here, at the 2-year mark, that very same car could be worth 60K to begin with. So the part that I'm trying to get you to understand is that 60K financed is the same as 120K leased. However, here's the big detractor of the two. When you buy the car at 120, you're in debt 120K, even if your lease payment is much smaller. That is the total value of your loan. And this matters quite a bit, because at the time you're returning the car, it is worth $60,000. So every payment you've made into this car, regardless of if it was the payment you could afford or not, that payment is now gone. This was like a long-term rental. However, when you buy your car at 60K, right, $60,000, that's already depreciated to that, and finance it instead of lease it, you're doing one thing. You're keeping the same payment. However, you're reselling the car 2 years later for 60K. Now, a couple of reasons why that matters. Even if your payment is exactly the same or slightly more here financed versus leased, something magical happens. You see, you're paying the same amount, let's say $1,000 a month, for example, for the exact same car. But what's happening is that same $1,000 after 24 months of payments equals $24,000. Now, in a conventional lease, that money would be gone, right? Completely gone. However, in this particular scenario, your $24,000 would go into your loan balance here, putting you in a position to basically be in this car $36,000, which is pretty incredible, because if the car was still worth $60,000 after its 2 years based on this depreciation cycle, you would now have $24,000 in equity when you sell the car. And you have to think about that, because one of the ways that we have been brainwashed to think about car ownership has been strictly to avoid this line and avoid this look in exchange for a monthly payment. I want you to understand why every car loan calculator on the internet says how much will your monthly payment be, how much monthly payment can I afford. It is not so much focused on what will my cost of ownership be, how much will I be able to resell my car for, but rather how much money can I afford. The entire media has been focused on how much money should you pay per month, how much money will you lose, why leasing is smart. But looking at this methodology, who is smarter? A person who took a $120,000 loan and turned it into $60,000, right? And drove a car for 2 years, 3 years, whatever that lease was, or someone who took the very same exact car, bought it at $60,000, was under the same exact warranty, drove it the exact same time, and ultimately left the transaction taking back all their monthly payments versus actually letting those payments go to the bank and be in debt a higher amount. Also, there's one thing that we're not talking about, and it's the fact that if you are a normal person that works a 9 to 5, you have a credit that is going to be impacted by this. You've taken a $120,000 loan, and that is going to be reflected on your credit. While your payments certainly is going to help your debt-to-income ratio, your actual obligation is still $120,000. If you total your car during that time, the actual insurance company has to write a check for that amount, not the depreciated amount of the car. And this is going to matter a lot again, because you're in a negative equity position, you need gap insurance, and you have a lot of things in leasing that just aren't in sight. And so with this methodology, there are a couple of steps that you need to understand. That first off, buying a used car isn't evil, especially if the car is still under warranty. There are ways to protect yourself to ensure you're buying a car that doesn't have previous damage or issues, and it's not that hard. It takes 3 easy steps. Now, in addition to that, there is something to be said. The majority of normal cars depreciate over a 5-year cycle. That's why the majority of car loans are 5 years. However, exotic and luxury cars depreciate on a 3-year cycle. The majority of the depreciation is upfront. So you're getting a better car that's depreciated more in a shorter time frame, letting you drive the latest model under the latest warranty without actually positioning for the largest loss because it's already been taken from someone else. Let me give you a perfect example of this in a manner that maybe can make it very easy for you to understand. A new Rolls-Royce Phantom, which is pretty much fantasy to most people, is $700,000 new, which is pretty crazy, right? Brand new. If you add 1,000 miles to this car and drive it for 2 years, you ready for this? This car is now worth $400,000. That's a $300,000 loss for some poor guy who either leased it or basically bought it thinking it was a good idea because it was a really cool car. That is a $300,000 in depreciation in less than 2 years. But look at what magically happens after that. 2 years later, that very same car is only worth $350,000. And I want you to understand, this is 2 years after that. However, this car is still under warranty for a total of 4 years to begin with. So during its entire warranty period, a person can choose to lose $300,000 or $50,000 for just 1,000 miles of driving by the time they buy it. And I'm giving you this example because I literally did this with my very own Rolls-Royce. So the choice isn't, do I lose nothing or is this a free car or not? The choice is, in this particular case, this is the worst depreciating car in America, and I'm giving you a very perfect example of that. The worst depreciating car in America, using this strategy, can still be driven for 2 years for $50,000. Now, you may think this is terrible and it's a terrible idea, but I want to bring you to this very interesting fact right here. That's about $2,200 a month to drive an almost $1 million car using this strategy, versus if divided 300,000 by 24, that's pretty bad, guys. It's over $10,000 a month. Like, I want you to think that way. So that is pretty crazy. Would you rather pay $2,200 or $10,000 to drive the same car? Well, that is the same principle on the worst depreciating exotic in the world, right? In America and anywhere, the Rolls-Royce Phantom is one of the worst investments you can make, and I own one, so I know this. And I want to show you this exactly. I wanted to show you this exactly because I want you to understand in the worst cycle. Now, let's take a look at the best cycle. Let's take, for example, something much simpler, like a Lamborghini Huracan. This is a very common exotic that a lot of people in America right now are dreaming of as their dream car. They think of this car. This car is about $250,000 new, which is pretty crazy, right? And the $250,000 depreciated in 3 years with 5,000 miles on the clock, this very same car is $190,000. So if you lease this car, you basically bought yourself somewhere, including your taxes, about a $60,000 loss across 3 years. And that's not bad, right? That's a pretty exciting thing. That's $20,000 a year, right? So that's not that bad. That's a little bit under $2K a month. And that's why the lease deals are usually between $2 to $3K a month on a Lamborghini Huracan. But let me show you this magical thing that happens. Between year 2 and year 5 of the car, 5,000 miles later, the value of that same car is $190,000. And it fluctuates all the way up to $210,000. That's right. The car value actually goes up, not down. Which means that if you kept this car from year 2 to year 5, you could have driven it and actually made $20,000 versus lost $60,000. And here's the better part. Even if you made payments, obviously, because you didn't buy this cash, and let's say you did pay this $3,000 to $4,000 a month payment, every payment you made went into your equity. So when you sold your car and got your 20K profit, you also got back all the equity for 2 years. Which means that if you paid $40,000 in payments, all of that came back and you have a $60,000 check. This is the ultimate way to understand what the finance industry has done to us. They have made us believe that a lower monthly payment automatically equates to a better financial decision. And so here I am today showing you creative financing and unveiling the truth on why leasing is the worst and absolutely worst thing you can do to your credit. It is the worst thing you can do to your income, and is the absolute worst thing you can do to your wallet to own a car that isn't even nearly as good as the one you could have financed that is slightly older, still under warranty, almost brand new with almost no miles on it, and still puts you in a better financial position. Now, this is the kind of creative ideology that Exotic Car Hacks teaches people. It teaches people modern finance and understanding of where are these cars, how can I pick them, how can I buy them at this value, and how to put yourself in that idea, and more importantly, mindset. Because you could use this mindset with any car, but it pertains to specifically what we talked about, cars that are going to depreciate less. And so this is what we have here at Exotic Car Hacks, an opportunity to reframe your power and taking control back and not letting dealerships and financial institutions, and more importantly, car manufacturers, get you conned into thinking that a lower payment is a better option. And so if you love this video, I would love to teach you more at Exotic Car Hacks.